Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations, episode number 92. I'm your host, Joe Hannan, Joe from Jersey. This episode is going to focus on this idea of conviction in Jiu-Jitsu, where it comes from, and its close cousins and close proxies. And as always, the caveat here is that these are ideas that I'm playing with sort of in real time. I don't pretend to be some arbiter of conviction in Jiu-Jitsu. I think this is something I'm building toward, and perhaps this exploration could be beneficial for you. But before we get into that, this episode of BJJ Meditations is sponsored by Outlier Database. Outlier Database is the ultimate analytical tool for no-gi jiu-jitsu. It's a tag searchable database that allows you to see how principles, concepts, and techniques are applied at the highest levels of grappling. I use Outlier Database as a supporting tool for my jiu-jitsu study. I use it in partnership with instructionals to see how these concepts are being applied at the highest levels of the sport. And it's incredibly helpful. You know, there's a major difference between observing a technique in an instructional with a cooperative uke versus watching it happen in real time. And synthesizing those two things, I think, is something that's essential. You can sign up for Outlier Database today at outlierdb.com. You can use the promo code BJJMed to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's BJJMED. And that's Outlier, OUTLIERDB.com, promo code BJJMed. Link is also in our show notes. And thank you to Jake Luigi and Outlier Database for supporting the podcast. Yeah, so first of all, I'm trying really hard to be more consistent with this podcast. Part of this is just a scheduling problem. For a while, I was thinking I could record it on the weekend, and that's just not happening because my weekends are filled with, child activities. We have another baby on the way due in May, and we have to get the house ready for that. So there is very little time for anything podcast related on the weekend, but I'm hoping that I can be consistent if I continue to recording these things on Friday afternoon. And I also kind of have tricked myself into thinking I have run out of things to say. I think the reason why I'm thinking about that is because my relationship to jiu-jitsu is fundamentally changing. I'm no longer sort of relating to it as an athlete who happens to teach. I'm really kind of taking this teacher first mentality. I'm also sitting with this really difficult principle or idea that can I truly be an excellent coach without ever having achieved anything substantial? And on one hand, I think there's sort of an invaluable experiential quality, let's call it, to a life in the arena and life as a world champion, because you know what it takes in a way that someone who's just an amateur does not. So there's that aspect of it. And the other aspect is that there are plenty of excellent coaches out there who, because of whatever value proposition they bring to the table, are great at what they do. And it has nothing to do with time in the arena. Maybe they've played the sport themselves. They didn't achieve world champion status or anything like that, but they have other gifts to give. Maybe they're great communicators. Maybe they're great thinkers. Maybe they're great at flexing the message or the technique to meet the student where they're at. There's this whole other set of skills that goes into coaching that I'm trying to refine. And increasingly, I'm starting to feel like, yeah, that world-class experience is invaluable. It's irreplaceable. But I don't think that necessarily diminishes my value as a coach. And I also think one can fuel the other, right? I don't necessarily have to hang up the athlete mantle, although my body increasingly is telling me to do that. But in coaching, I'm hopefully not just refining the way the students in the school learn, but I'm also refining the way that I learn. And that sort of brings me to this idea of conviction in jiu-jitsu. There's this real tendency in the sport to confuse the theoretical with the actual. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to spend your days observing the cutting edge of jiu-jitsu, trying to figure out who's doing what, how to do it the way they do it. And it's very attractive because if you follow this sort of knowledge banking model of jiu-jitsu, whereby one wins by having the greatest treasure trove of knowledge, technical knowledge in your armory, it's a very easy game to play in the sense that all you have to do is invest your time and attention. You don't actually have to invest your body, right? And that's not conviction. I've tried this. I'm sure you have as well. You see something cool on Instagram, or you see something cool in an instructional, and you take it to the mat and it doesn't work. And it's because you have not actually actualized this. I think that's where conviction comes into play. You can borrow BJJ techniques, you can borrow BJJ frameworks, but until you've integrated them, there's no conviction to them. And that kind of makes me wonder, what is conviction in the sense of things? In the sense of, what is conviction within Jiu-Jitsu, the game of Jiu-Jitsu? Kind of where my mind is going with this is it's embodied knowledge. This idea of embodiment is simply that we do not have bodies, we are a body, right? We're this sort of unified sensing organ known as a body. The distinctions we make about mind and body are merely artifacts of language. So until we can do these things without thinking about them, I don't know if we can necessarily have conviction about them. And I'm experiencing this firsthand right now in my training, my learning. You know, this knee injury, which fortunately seems to be improving, has forced me in a way to rebuild major cornerstones of my game, specifically the guards that I play and the way I'm passing. So I went on this mission to integrate half guard in a way that I hadn't. I played a lot of half guard as a blue belt, and that's how my ears got messed up, because I wasn't playing it well. I would just get smashed and passed over and over again, especially because I was a bit smaller at the time. So I kind of got away from half guard in favor more of X guard and similar things like that as a purple belt and as a brown belt. And in the early stages of black belt, I kind of came back to close guard. But I'm coming back to it with fresh eyes. And I tell people when I'm studying half guard that I'm really like a blue belt in half guard. And that's true, because that's kind of where I set it down, picking up where I left off. But I'm leaning into that, perhaps in a way that I haven't leaned into my training in Jiu-Jitsu before. You know, I picked up Craig Jones's latest Z-Guard instructional just because we're built similarly. And I think I was historically trying to play a smaller person's half guard. And it's been illuminating, but there have been these moments where I have been trying to integrate what he does. And maybe elements of work, if it are working, maybe elements are not. And ultimately, when it's falling apart, I'm stuck to wonder, is it falling apart because this truly doesn't work for me? Or is it falling apart because I truly haven't studied it sufficiently? And I'm sure both of those elements are true, but there's this other element, sort of this meta element of conviction. These things will not work unless I am convinced that they will work, unless I have put in the repetition and the time on the mat to sort of ingrain them in this embodied sense and figured it out for myself relative to my own body, how it's structured, and my own proclivities, both psychological and physical. And, you know, to bring it back to this idea of coaching, this is why I'm increasingly becoming a fan of the constraints-led approach to instruction, because it allows me as a teacher and as a student to present or be presented with a problem, and then present, or in the case of me as student, distill the principles for solving that problem, really like bringing it down to first principles. And then either letting the students to sort of assemble their own solutions that are aligned with those principles, or doing the same myself. But I think sort of the hub of this wheel, the thing that keeps it all turning, is this idea that Josh has talked about over the years, Josh Waitzkin has talked about over the years, of the personal locus point. We all have this personal locus point from which we relate to the world. And Jiu-Jitsu is an element of the world, so we could include that in that equation. I don't know how this shows up for you when you're learning, but for me, it's a very kinesthetic and aesthetic thing. Like, for example, X-Guard always made sense to me in a kinesthetic way, and it also felt aesthetically beautiful. Like, things in Jiu-Jitsu to me have to feel beautiful. They have to feel attractive in some non-superficial way. And if that element is not there, then it just doesn't work for me. And I think that's part of why I got away from half guard. But the beautiful thing about the constraints-led approach, from my experience as a learner and a coach, is that it enables people to explore these concepts from their personal locus point and then assemble the principles to see fit. It's like giving somebody a vast array of Legos and telling them to build something, like build a firehouse out of the Legos. You can either give them the image and the instructions that come along with the Legos to build the firehouse, and they may or may not do it. Or you could just say, yeah, build the firehouse, and everyone's going to have a different looking firehouse. They're all going to be differing degrees of structurally sound and aesthetically pleasing. But I think that process of discovery and integration is highly personal. And the more we can make that a personal act, the more substantial the learning is going to be. And to tie it into this overall point of conviction, there's going to be more conviction rooted in that process. And the way I'm relating to this right now is through my study of, as I mentioned, the Craig Jones Z-guard approach and Joseph Chen's tripod passing. And this is sort of like a tale of two opposites in a way. Because with Craig, I very much went into the studying of the instructional, taking notes, bringing my little notebook to the mat, and trying to replicate exactly what he was doing. And with degrees of success, I would be able to replicate what he was doing with opponents who are either mildly resisting or not. And then I would go to live training and other variables would be introduced. For example, he has this really great Kimura trap set up from the Z-guard. And I think this is just a product of how people like to play in my school. Almost nobody passes from their knees in my school. And almost nobody is going to let you capture that far side arm. Like maybe if it's a brand new student, they'll allow that to happen. And everybody was just kind of standing up in my half guard to go to headquarters and start passing that way. So I really couldn't even get it to start working until I changed the approach and abandoned that Kimura approach altogether in favor of the Choi bar. Now, people were, as always, especially in the gi, reaching for my head as a way to pass, and the Choi bar just kind of presents itself as an opportunity there. Even if I can't land it, just the threat of it is often enough to get them to posture up hard. And then I could transition to more of a traditional knee shield half guard and work all those sweeps that you learn as a white belt from that position. But it took this realization through this constraints-based approach to learning, setting up rounds where I'm starting from half guard and where we have reset conditions relative to this person achieves this position, etc. That's how I came to realize that. And ultimately now I am developing this half guard that's truer to how I'm built, and also just it's a more authentic representation of my self-expression in jiu-jitsu. And now, I'm really enamored with tripod passing, and I'm taking a radically different approach to studying it. Like, I haven't even purchased Joseph Chen's instructional yet. I've mostly just been watching how he applies it in live training, and I've watched a few videos on YouTube of others' interpretation of it. And I'm intentionally not loading up my mind with too much. All I've tried to do is figure out what sort of the launch pad is for this tripod passing. And essentially it's a near side underhook, head opposite side. And I'm enjoying sort of having more of like a Keisagatame grip on the arm that is not underhooked. And then from there, I can watch Joseph Chen or Craig Jones or anybody tripod pass and ad infinitum. But until I get used to knowing when to pike up and being comfortable with having my forehead on the mat and the additional strain it might be putting on the back of my neck, like back of my neck is sore, not in like a painful way. It just feels like I've been doing iron neck exercises or something like that. But until I get used to that, until it's integrated in this embodied knowledge that I'm trying to build, I won't have conviction in it. And it's not even a matter of just seeing it and feeling it work. It's not just a matter of, okay, I can get this pass whenever I want it. It's a combination of my body knows what to do in such a way where I don't have to run the machinations of like, okay, my opponent's doing this, I have to do that in order to respond to it. I want it to be automatic. And to me, that's what real conviction is in jiu-jitsu. It'd be super easy to just sit there and replicate what Joseph Chen and Craig Jones do. It's just time on task studying that's going to come memorization, and that's going to come more easily for some of you than others, but it's a highly doable task. On the other hand, taking this, transforming it into embodied knowledge and building conviction around it, having belief that it works, that's a radically different proposition. And to me, that seems to be these days where the true work of jiu-jitsu is. But of course, there's this tension, and I'll leave you guys with this. And I mentioned this earlier in the episode. I'm constantly asking myself, does this truly not work for me? Or is it really a matter of I just haven't studied it sufficiently? Because half guard works. I got away from it a long time ago because I had this false notion that it didn't work. But my hypothesis here is that it wasn't working because I wasn't playing it in a way that was true to how my body is built and also true to the way that I like to play jiu-jitsu. And figuring that out is a lot more mysterious and a lot more onerous than just going back to the instructional and trying to mirror what they're doing. It's this process of looking and then looking again, and it never stops. We never really, people talk about mastery and different things. I don't think mastery is a static point. It's something that we're constantly moving toward, and it's like chasing the horizon. It just keeps retreating on you. But I think living and living a truly self-expressed life as a learner is chasing that horizon anyway, because to sit there and stare at the horizon, you're not going anywhere, and I'm not even sure if you're alive, at least for me. I'd have to check my pulse if I were doing that. So I would encourage you in your studies to think really carefully about this idea of conviction. Like, where do you have true conviction in what you do? Where is it coming from, and how did you achieve it? Because that's probably a major unlock for you in terms of learning jiu-jitsu going forward. That's all I have for you this week. As always, you can email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to send questions, observations, comments. I don't care. I just like to correspond with the people who are listening to the podcast. It's nice to know that there are others out there. Also, if you've been following along on BJJ Mental Models, I'm not sure if this has gone out yet, but we will be having a BJJ Mental Models camp at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu this summer. So give us a follow on Instagram, or follow BJJ Mental Models and look for updates on that. That's going to be a really great time. If you're coming to Princeton, obviously Princeton, the town itself, is beautiful. You're maybe like an hour and 10 minutes outside of New York City, so you can always go and explore New York. Philadelphia is about equidistant. Yeah, if you're going to go to a Phillies game, I would just highly recommend that you do not wear any of the clothing or attire of the opposing team. Just asking for a problem. But yeah, that's what I've got for you folks. Once again, thanks again to our sponsor, Outlier Database. You can use the promo code BJJMed to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's Outlier, OUTLIERDB.com, and promo code BJJMED. I'll also put the link in our show notes. Thanks again for listening, folks, and we will talk hopefully next week.